Happy New Year, everyone! I hope that 2024 is treating you really well so far. Do you have any New Year's resolutions for this year? I think I should make my resolution to be more consistent with my content. I do apologise that it's been a while since the last True Crime Time video was uploaded, but I've been super busy, and this video was actually recorded live on Twitch all the way back in October of 2023. 2024, I have a lot more true crime videos planned, as well as a lot of streams over on Twitch, so I do hope that you're going to enjoy all of the upcoming content this year. Just a quick reminder too, that all of my true crime content is recorded live on Twitch, so if you want to be the first to see my true crime content, make sure to give my Twitch channel a follow, and you can find this in the description box down below. In today's case, we're going to be discussing John Wayne Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown. I just want to give a quick trigger warning for this case. Today's case will include mentions of necrophilia, torture, SA, and murder. So if it's something that you don't want to listen to, I completely understand. You're more than welcome to click off the video and come back when we're talking about a topic that you are more comfortable with. I just want to make everyone aware that this video is for informational purposes only. All of the content that we will be talking about today is information that I have gathered through research I conducted on the internet using readily available sources. This video is intended to educate, and no disrespect is intended towards any of the victims that we will be talking about today. I do try my hardest to ensure that all of the information that I gather is correct, but please take into consideration that there may be some errors or gaps within the information, but I try to avoid this as much as physically possible. So, without further ado, let's get into today's video. John Wayne Gacy Jr. was born on the 17th of March 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, to parents Marion Elaine Robinson and John Stanley Gacy. So John Stanley Gacy, his dad was a World War I veteran, and John Gacy Jr., the individual in this we're talking about in this presentation, was the second of three children. John had a difficult childhood, and his father suffered from alcoholism, which often led him to beating John and his two sisters with a strap if they thought they had misbehaved. John was described as a sickly, overweight child who struggled to bond with children his own age, and that led him to suffer from alienation from his peers at school. When John was 11, he was actually struck in the head with a swing, and this led to a blood clot in his brain, which wasn't actually identified until he was 16 years old. This injury caused him to suffer from frequent seizures and blackouts, and this made it so he was regularly in hospital. He was prescribed medication to dissolve the clot, and then since he had this medication, the seizures actually stopped. He also had a congenital heart disease, and that didn't help with his alienation because he was unable to play with other kids because of the heart disease. And this made his father actually look down on him. But he still looked up to his father and wanted to become closer to him, but he didn't actually manage to do so before his father died, and he's said to have regretted that for the rest of his life. John was reported to be having abnormal sexual desires at a very young age. And this is said to have started at 6 years old. And this is because he suffered abuse from the age 6 to 10 at the hands of a family friend. He later realised that he was attracted to men, and that caused a lot of turmoil in his life because it wasn't very widely accepted during this time. It was the 60s, 70s where this was taking place. John attended 4 different high schools in his senior year, but he didn't actually end up graduating from high school at all. He dropped out. And instead, he left Chicago, where he grew up, and he moved to Las Vegas. Worked as a janitor in Las Vegas, a janitor in a morgue, actually. And whilst he was living in Las Vegas, he is said to have been struggling financially, so much so that he was actually allowed to live in the morgue, and he was often reported to be talking with the dead people residing in there. So there have apparently been rumours that he both slept in a coffin alongside the body of one deceased boy, and also engaged in necrophilia with the body of another young boy. But I did only see this in a few references. I can't 100% confirm that. It's only been in a few sources. After only a few months of living in Las Vegas, he realised that the life in Las Vegas just wasn't for him, and he actually moved back to Chicago. Although he didn't graduate high school, he did attend and graduate from the Northwestern Business College in Chicago in the 1960s. He was said to be a born salesman, and he was able to talk his way in and out of any situation. He was hired by a company, and after working his way up through the company, he was actually transferred to be a manager at a men's clothing company, and he remained in this position for just under a year. After this position, he had the opportunity to become a manager of a KFC restaurant in Waterloo, Iowa. And this is when he became engaged to a woman named Marilyn Myers in September 1964, when John was only 22 years old. You can see him and Marilyn there in that picture with one of the kids that they went on to have. Marilyn's family was said to be quite wealthy as well. They quickly got married 9 months later after they met in 1965, which is when they actually relocated to Waterloo, Iowa. They then had a son in February 1966 and a daughter in March 1967. So 2 kids very close to each other. John is actually said to have been a really good member of society, and he was really well liked across the whole community at this point as well. On December the 3rd, 1968, John was actually sentenced to 10 years behind bars for sodomy at the Anamosa State Penitentiary. And this was because he forced 2 male minors to watch adult films and initiate sexual contact with them. During this time serving his sentence, his wife Marilyn was actually granted a divorce from him due to, quote, cruel and inhumane treatment. She was given full custody of the kids, and John Gacy would actually never see his kids or his ex-wife again. Sadly, John was released on parole only 18 months into his 10-year sentence because of good behavior, and this was on the 18th of June, 1970. After he was released, he moved straight back to Chicago. And it makes you think, if he wasn't let out, he may not have gone and done the things that he did do. So it didn't take long for John to be back to committing vile acts again. On the 12th of February, 1971, less than 9 months after he was granted parole, a young boy went to police and told them that John had picked him up at a bus station and tried to force him into having intimate relations. Sadly, the charges were dropped, and John got no punishment for the crimes, and this is because the boy failed to turn up to the trial. He was then arrested again in 1972 for similar charges to another boy, and this was also dropped. So he's got away with 2 further crimes, which is so frustrating. It's so frustrating that he was able to get away with it like this. It honestly, it shouldn't have got to where it did. So in 1971, John started a construction business, which is PDM Contractors. You can see the business card down at the bottom of the screen there. And this allowed him to purchase a home with his mother in Cook County, Illinois. Within this business, he's said to have mainly employed young male high school students and younger men. There have also been reports that he would demand relations from these boys under the threat of violence. But once again, no charges were ever given. In 1971, John got into another relationship, and this was with a recently divorced childhood friend named Carol Hoff, and she had 2 young daughters from a previous marriage. She would become his second wife shortly after on the 1st of July, 1972. So they got married very, very quickly, and you can see them both there. I believe this is a picture from their wedding day. So shortly after his marriage to Carol, on the 1st of January, 1972, John claimed his first victim. John's first victim was 15-year-old Timothy Jack McCoy, who was born on the 14th of May, 1955. Timothy's body wasn't actually identified until 1986, and this was 14 years after his death. And the identification was conducted via dental records. Timothy's cause of death was stated to be 2 stab wounds to the chest, which is different to the other MOs, and we'll get into that shortly. What is said to have happened is that John lured Timothy to his home for sexual relations after picking him up from the Greyhound bus station. And this Greyhound bus station is kind of a recurring place. He picks up quite a few people from this bus station. And this was whilst Timothy was on his way to visit his father in Nebraska. So the morning after John took Timothy home, John found Timothy standing in his bedroom doorway holding a knife. John rushed to attack him, wresting the knife off of Timothy and stabbing Timothy to death. John stated that he believed at the time that Timothy was going to attack him, but he actually found that Timothy was holding the knife because he cooked them both breakfast. So he'd come to tell John that he'd cooked them breakfast, and John just killed him. John then hid Timothy's body in the crawl space beneath his home, but when his wife Carol moved in shortly after they got married, she complained of a foul odor in the basement. So John retrieved Timothy's body, covered it in concrete to stop the smell. Here we're going to go about some of the other victims. So One of the other victims was 18-year-old construction employee John Butkovich. I'm sorry if I said that wrong. But it was said that on the 31st of July, 1975, John Gacy led John, the victim, into John's house with the promise to discuss overdue pay because he worked for John's construction company. Once he was there, John Gacy refused to pay the boy and an argument actually occurred. Gacy is said to have given John alcohol and somehow tricked him into putting handcuffs on when he then strangled him to death, sadly, and his body was found in the garage of John's home. Most of John's victims were actually buried in the crawl space under his house, and he's reported to have ordered some of his victims to dig trenches under the house, which he would later bury their own bodies in. This is something that is reported to have occurred to Gregory Godzik, I think that's how you say it, and he was aged only 17 years old at the time. He was again employed by John in the construction business, and he actually confided in John that he wanted to run away from home. He was having a hard time at home, and he wanted to run away. And it's said that Gregory passed away on the 12th of December, 1976. The last time he was seen, he was dropping a date off at a home in his car, and he was never seen since. But his car was found by police the following day. So another victim is John Cizik, and on the 20th of January 1977, John Cizik, who was aged only 19, was seen driving his 1971 Plymouth Satellite. He was never seen again after this, but another teenager was actually caught by police whilst trying to leave a gas station without paying for his fuel. The teenager told the police that he actually lived with Gacy at the time, and after checking with John Gacy, he told the police that John Cizik, which is the missing teenager, had actually sold him the car. But of course, yet again, police failed to look into this any further, and if they had looked into it, they would have actually seen that the car was signed over to Gacy using a fake signature 18 days after John Cizik had actually vanished. So it could have even ended there if they'd just looked into it. It's like the police didn't even seem to try in this case. We see it happening time and time again, and I just don't understand why they don't do more. Like, this kid vanished and someone was driving his car. Would you not think to look into it? I really can't wrap my head around why the police have done nothing. 2 out of the 3 cases we have looked into so far have been US ones, and they have all been horrendous police work. They really, really have. It's so frustrating to look into it and just think how simple it seems to have just been able to solve this and stop it from going as far as it did. So we're getting on to why he is actually called the Killer Clown. And this is because in 1975, John joined a local clown club called the Jolly Joker Clown Club. This led him to often be wearing clown clothes and makeup, and he actually adopted the names Pogo and Patches the Clown. The club often performed at fundraisers and parades, and he often volunteered to provide entertainment to kids at the local hospital, which absolutely sickens me. John stated that each of the clowns had a different persona, with Pogo being described as the happy clown, and this is the one that he is said to have worn or acted as the most. And then Patches is said to be the sad clown. John claimed that he enjoyed dressing as a clown as it allowed him to regress back to his childhood, and if you remember, he didn't have a very good childhood. So it kind of, I guess, allowed him to feel the inner child that he never got to experience. And yet again, this made people in town really like him and improved his already good reputation even further. So he has this absolutely spotless, sparkling reputation around town. But in the background, he is the most deprived, disgusting human being. And it's always so shocking when these people have such 180 personalities. Like, they can seem to be the nicest person ever doing all of this charity work, and yet in the background they're going around murdering people. It's crazy how people can be so deceptive like that. John is also said to have become really involved in politics, and in particular the Democratic Party, and he was actually awarded for his services by being provided with the title Precinct Captain. This work actually even led him to have the chance to meet the then US First Lady, Rosalind Carter. John even states that he had an interest in actually eventually running for office, but the rumors about his interest in young boys had started to spread, and that actually prevented it from happening, which is probably very, very lucky. So his wife, his second wife, Carol Hoff, is said to have noticed that he was bringing home young boys into his garage in the early hours of the morning, and this was after John had confessed to her that he was bisexual. This resulted in them getting a divorce on the 2nd of March 1976 after only 4 years of marriage. She claimed that he had unpredictable moods and an obsession with homosexual magazines. That is her words. But like I say, back in the 70s and stuff, being bisexual or gay or anything like that, it wasn't accepted as widely as it is today, which is really sad. But he was abusing young boys as well at the same time. So I do feel bad for the people that it did affect, though, and it still does affect, obviously. So one victim who actually managed to survive Gacy's attacks was Robert Donnelly. In late 1977, 19-year-old Robert Donnelly was abducted from a Chicago bus stop by Gacy and brought back to Gacy's house. Here Gacy SA and tortured him, and he actually repeatedly dunked his head in a filled bathtub until he passed out, and actually pretended to execute him with blank rounds, which I found, when I read that, was really, really, it shocked me. Like, that is really, really disgusting. At the time of the attack, Robert was actually said to be begging Gacy to kill him, as he was in so much pain from the torture that Gacy was putting him through. But he was actually let go and told not to tell anyone what happened. Robert did go and tell the police, but seeing as Gacy told them it was all consensual, nothing was done. Yet again, the police have failed. Another person who survived Gacy's attack was Jeffrey Rignall, and he was aged 26 at the time. He was lured into a car by John with the offer of a smoke and a car ride. Once he was in the car, John held a chloroform-soaked rag over Jeffrey's face until he passed out. He took him back to his home and then proceeded to repeatedly SA Jeffrey throughout the night before dumping him under a statue in Chicago's Lincoln Park. Jeffrey then spent the next 6 days in hospital for his injuries and actually suffered from permanent liver damage because of the chloroform. Yet again, he tried to tell the police what happened, but seeing as he couldn't identify who had done it to him, the police were skeptical of his story, and nothing was done. The ordeal sadly left Jeffrey depressed, and he got addicted to drugs. And he sadly passed away in the year 2000 due to AIDS, and he was only aged 49. Sadly, many other men and boys weren't as lucky, and they lost their lives to the hands of John. At the end of this video, I'm going to show a short video I made with pictures of each of the identified victims. Sadly, I didn't really have enough time to go into the lives of every single victim, but I do want to at least acknowledge them. And like I said before, I don't want to go into too much of the details, about how they passed and things like that. I don't want to be disrespectful in that way. I feel like sometimes it can come across as a bit insensitive when you go into too much detail about everything that happened with them. So I just want to, celebrate their lives. So the final victim, in 1978, a young boy named Robert Peast, aged 15, had been reported as missing when he wasn't around after his work shift at the pharmacy. And this was strange because his mum was actually coming to collect him, and she was obviously expecting him there at the end of his shift. And this was after he was claiming to go and see John Wayne Gacy regarding a job that he was offered. He was approached by John during his shift that day, whilst he was working at the local pharmacy called Nissan Pharmacy. And John had actually offered him a job at his construction business to earn the same wage that he was earning at the pharmacy. Robert sadly passed away on the 11th of December 1978, but his body wasn't actually found until the 9th of April 1979. And this was because John had actually left his body in the Des Plaines River, which was located near to where John lived. And this was because John, at a later date, stated that there was no more room left under his house where he had buried most of the previous victims. John is said to have strangled Robert and then slept alongside his body, which knocks me physically sick. When I read that, it knocked me physically sick. And then he left his body in the river the next morning, and it's just so heartbreaking because these boys were so young. They were so young, and it's just awful to think about the things that they've gone through, and it really breaks my heart. It really does. So after police had discovered that Robert had vanished after going to meet John, it finally sparked police interest. John actually denied ever offering Robert a job, but the police were actually getting suspicious for once. And this led them to obtain a search warrant for his house on the 13th of December. Following the search, there was a receipt found for a roll of film from Nissan Pharmacy, where Robert Peast actually worked. So that linked Robert to John in some kind of way. And this led to John being placed under police surveillance, and he was actually quickly arrested as he was caught handling illegal drugs. So that meant that they could then take him into custody. When searching his home initially, the police actually found the crawl space, and they noted that they smelled a really rancid smell of what they believed at the time to be sewage. But in this initial search, they didn't find any of the bodies. In the first picture up top, you can see some of the items that they actually found, some of the items of evidence, and that includes the handcuffs that John used and the receipts for the roll of film from the Nissan Pharmacy. And then in the second picture down below, that is John's house. You can see what his house actually looked like. So after his arrest, John finally confessed to killing one boy, and that was the first boy. And he stated that he hid his body under the garage, but he claimed he killed him in self-defense. So John actually showed the police where the body could be found in the garage, but police decided to search the crawl space again before they wanted to dig in the garage. And luckily in doing so, they sadly found the remains of 26 boys buried in the crawl space underneath John's house. John then finally confessed to the murders on Friday the 22nd of December 1978, providing a statement admitting to the murder of 33 boys. So out of those 33, 26 of the men, or the boys, were found underneath John's home in the crawl space. You can see in that picture down there the artist sketch of the house. You can see the labeled crawl space underneath the house. 26 of the boys were found underneath his house, with the remaining 7 boys' bodies being found either in other areas of the property or nearby the Des Plaines River. He had dumped a few of the boys' bodies in the river. John stated that his MO was that he would lure boys to his home, handcuff, SA them, and during this he would stuff a sock or underwear down their throats to muffle their screams before strangling them to death. That is basically the most common way that he decided he was going to do this. So here you can actually see the floor plan of John's house, which was created by the crime scene investigators. The black bars you can see are where they found the remains of the boys, and the grey striped bars are the concrete slabs that he added to, I guess, encase them. So you can see just the amount of bodies under there. It's absolutely awful. And some of them are very close together, and it's believed that those that are close together were actually buried at the same time. So on some occasions, he is said to have killed more than one boy in a day, which is awful to think about. But yeah, some of them were said to be buried together. But the fact as well that some of these boys were actually made to dig their own graves without even knowing. They didn't even know. They were employed by him in his construction business, and they were tasked to dig out underneath his house. Little did they know, they were literally digging their own graves. How awful is that to think back on? His trial began on the 6th of February 1980. His defense lawyer actually claimed that John was insane and not in control of his body during the time of the murders. He stated, quote unquote, his actions were irrational and impulsive. And this is because John had actually claimed he had an alter ego named Jack Hanley who committed the crimes. Luckily, the insanity plea didn't work, and psychologists stated that he was sane. So he was tried as a sane man, and it was believed that he was in control of his actions at the time of all of the murders. During the trial, several ex-employees actually testified against John, and they stated that he often had violent and sexual outbursts towards them, and would often trick them into being handcuffed, which, if you remember back, that was what he did to a lot of the victims. He would handcuff them before he murdered them. It took only 2 hours for the jury to deliberate and come back with a guilty verdict in March 1980, and then John was sentenced to death. He remained at the Murdered Correctional Center in Illinois for 14 years until he was executed by lethal injection on the 10th of May 1994 at Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois. And his final words were said to be, quote unquote, "kiss my ass." What a wonderful person. Absolutely no remorse for anything that he did. Awful, awful person, hidden behind this fake persona of being this wonderful, charitable man who goes to hospitals and helps kids who are in hospital. Absolutely disgusting. The day before his execution, he sat down for his last meal, and in his last meal, he requested deep fried shrimp, KFC chicken, French fries, Coca-Cola, and 1 pound of strawberries. This seems to be quite famous for some reason. I saw it mentioned quite a lot about his last meal, and I think it was probably because he requested KFC chicken when he was a manager at KFC. When he was asked how many people he had killed whilst he was in prison, he stated, quote unquote, "Well, I've said this, I've said that, but 45 sounds like a good number," end quote. When he was pushed for more information about these extra victims, he claimed to police, quote, "That's your job to find out," end quote. Now I'm going to show you the short video that I made, and this video is a list of all of the deceased victims of John Wayne Gacy. I'm doing this just so that you're aware of every single one of them, so that they can get the recognition and remembrance that they actually deserve. There are a few victims who have been unidentified. One of the most recent victims to be identified was actually in 2021, and that was Francis Wayne Alexander, and he would have been around 21 to 22 years old at the time, and he is said to have died sometime between 1976 and 1977. It apparently couldn't be pinpointed, but he is the most recent person to have been identified. But there are still some of the boys who couldn't actually be identified, but I really hope, I really, really hope that one day they can be identified in some way. And with that, I just want to thank you all very much for watching today's video. I really appreciate your support with this style of content, and I hope you were able to learn something new today. If so, let me know what it was down below. Also, if you do want to see more of me, I stream live on Twitch several times a week, and you can see the links on the screen now or down in the description box below. If you have any suggestions for cases that you would like to see me cover in the future, make sure to comment them and I would love to see your suggestions. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Make sure that you stick to those New Year's resolutions if you have them, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye!